it's a collective volume that I edited with. That also means that I don't have to summarize the book, which is much better. I edited it with my colleague at Bard, Tirdad Zolgadar. It began as a conference co-organized between the Curatorial Studies Center at Bard and the Human Rights Project at Bard, which we did in Arles in the south of France a couple of years ago. Arles is the site of an annual photography festival, and the conference coincided with that festival. So it was a conference about, roughly speaking, on the one hand, photography and human rights and the intimacy between those two discourses in the 20th century, but also in some debates which are prominent both in the field of human rights and in the world of contemporary art, about the legacies of universalism and humanism and the legacies of the critiques of universalism and humanism. And so we invited a number of people to come and talk about those problems, a range of people, which is somehow symptomatic, I think, of something interesting that's happening now, in which curators, artists, critics, academics, activists, NGO people are somehow mixed up together in a number of interesting debates. And this book is an example or a symptom of that. It has all of those kinds of people in it. I'll just tell you some of the people in it. Roger Burgle, who was a curator of Documenta, Bassam Albaroni, who's a curator from Alexandria, Dominique Gonzalez-Forster and Marianne van Osten, who are artist critics, Michel Feyer, political theorist and publisher, Hito Sterl, artist, Anselm Frank, curator, Alex Klein, curator, but also Hal Foster, Denis Ollier, Georges Didi Uberman, art historians, literary theorists, and others as well. So, an interesting mix. The starting point of the book, and the title is a sort of a corruption of this starting point, is Ariella Azoulay's new project on the family of man. Azoulay is a photo theorist, photo historian, teaches at Brown now. And she's been engaged in a project which a number of us have collaborated on with her over the last couple of years, to reinvestigate the Museum of Modern Art exhibition, The Family of Man, from 1955, as was famously critiqued by Roland Barthes and Susan Sontag, among others, for its sentimental humanism. But Ariella was interested in stepping back a little bit from that critique and trying to understand why it was that photography emerged immediately after the Second World War in this kind of context as a language with a certain privilege for making claims about or raising questions about the status of humanity, for vehiculating some notion of a universal humanity that could be called a family. This was very much Steichen, Edward Steichen, the MoMA curator and real godfather of photography in the American Museum. It was very much his pet notion that photography was a certain kind of universal language that had a privileged relation to presenting this thing called humanity, and it was that Barthes famously took on. Ariella's proposition was that Barthes' critique only stated or restated the claim of the curator, but with a different evaluation. So when Barthes says the exhibition, The Family of Man, universalizes, dehistoricizes, erases specificity in the name of producing a vision of a universal humanity, he would have gotten no argument from Steichen at all. That was precisely the idea. And so her proposal was to look back, not in that grand way in which the critic merely endorses somehow negatively the vision of the curator, but to do what almost no one in 50 years of writing on this exhibition had done before, which was to actually look at the pictures. There are 505 photographs in this exhibition. And in wildly different and interesting ways, they all do something that's sort of like what Steichen proposed and Barth criticized, but not simply. Each one of them obviously is susceptible to having its, as they say, historical context restored. And one by one, Ariella and a group of other students and scholars have been working on that historical reconstruction of context and specificity for all of these photographs. And it turns out that they, when treated this way as not as an exhibition but as an archive, which is susceptible to this re-examination, they reveal a lot of interesting, dense ways in which photography was available as a way of making claims about human rights. So, and oftentimes contradictory claims, confusing ones, but nevertheless, when reread, the exhibition, when reread as an archive, the exhibition turns out to do some interesting things which don't correspond either to what Steichen proposed or to what Barth criticized. So that becomes a kind of paradigm for hanging on in a certain way or to something like a secular humanist tradition. But in a way that also challenges the self-confidence, the comfortable universalism that Barth correctly diagnosed in the curatorial intention. So what in various ways, this is the explicit focus of Azoulay's piece in the book, and it kind of percolates through a lot of the other texts in the book. What we tried to do, or what the authors tried to do effectively, was tease out another kind of less, almost never quoted dimension of Barth's critique of the family of man. He famously challenges its sentimental humanism for this dehistoricizing gesture. But in a kind of almost an aside, he refers to something which he likes, which is what he calls a progressive humanism. There's a sentimental humanism which is bad, and a progressive humanism which is endorsable by Barth. And that he describes simply as a matter of reversal. So if the Family of Man exhibition stripped away historical context, erased specificity, a progressive humanism restores it, supplies it, where some would see universal brotherhood and identity. A progressive humanism sees difference and history. Now, that seems like a little bit too obvious in its symmetry. And I think what happens is, over the course of the essays in the book, the tension between those positions gets worked out as a way of describing some contemporary predicaments in, on the one hand, contemporary art discourse, and on the other hand, contemporary human rights discourse, neither of which can seem to do without movements in both of those directions, a certain kind of universal dehistoricization and a certain kind of anti-universal rehistoricization. So that would be one way of describing something that's at work in a number of essays in this book.